Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the time. Today marks the anniversary of the horrific 13th of March Tugboat Massacre, in which 41 Cubans lost their lives at the hands of the Coast Guard, risking their lives to escape from the brutal oppression of the Castro tyranny. The victims and the survivors of that attack 16 years ago symbolized the ongoing struggle of the Cuban people to be free. This anniversary serves to remind the world that the same callous dictatorship that rammed the small tugboat and turned water cannons on innocent Cuban men, women, and children so that they could fall and drown to death is the same dictatorship in power today. This is a regime that trades political prisoners like baseball cards to manipulate public opinion and advance its brutal agenda. Do not be fooled. These are not releases. They are forced exile, means by which the tyrannical rulers in Havana seek to eliminate their opponents. And in forcibly removing them, the regime, yet again, is violating the fundamental rights of these prisoners of conscience. Having spent years in Castro's dungeons for having the courage to stand up for the basic liberties of the Cuban people, now these brave individuals will be banished from their homeland, courtesy of the dictatorship and its accomplice, the Spanish government. Faced with this prospect, nearly a dozen of the prisoners of conscience reported to have made the list have already expressed their refusal to leave the island upon release, including Dr. Oscar Elias Bisset, a 2007 recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Years ago, Dr. Bisset wrote to his fellow comrades, his countrymen, of a movement of complacency, to use his words, a movement that, and I quote him, tries to make Cubans devoted to freedom believe that they should applaud and be content with receiving limited doses of freedom, a movement which suggests that we Cubans do not deserve total freedom, but only small tokens of it. This movement of low expectations speculates that other fragments of freedom and democracy will automatically follow it, end quote. While some will use this latest farce to reward the Cuban regime, those who truly support freedom and democracy will heed the wise words of Dr. Bisset. It is no coincidence that this latest scheme promptly follows recent legislative efforts to provide an economic lifeline to the Cuban dictatorship. It is no coincidence that Fidel Castro chose this weekend to make his first public appearance in years, or to do a television interview on the Middle East to praise the enemies of freedom while attacking our democratic ally Israel. But this is not the first time that the regime has used political prisoners as pawns in its pursuit of infinite power. In 1978, the regime released 3,600 political prisoners in exchange for the Carter administration's easing of sanctions on the regime. Then 26 were released for Jesse Jackson in 1984, 3 for Bill Richardson in 1996, another one for former President Jimmy Carter in 2002, and 80 for Pope John Paul II in 1998. No sooner were these political prisoners freed than the cells that they once again were then filled with those seeking freedom from Castro's tyranny. With a recent visit from Syria's dictator and long-lasting ties with fellow state sponsors of terrorism, Iran, the tyrants of those rogue states are likely sharing trade secrets on how to best manipulate foreign nations to serve their own nefarious purposes. Syria, like Iran, is seeking nuclear capabilities, other non-conventional weapons, ballistic missiles, and it actively supports Islamic extremists. Similarly, Cuba provides safe haven to known extremists from around the world and continues to publicly defend violent organizations such as the FARC in Colombia, the anti-American, anti-democratic, anti-freedom agenda that these dictators have in common presents a threat to our U.S. national security interests. Let us not be fooled, Madam Speaker. I thank you for the time.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January